Hello, my emotional wisdom family. The reason why I'm using this filter is because we're going to be talking about shame and how shame works in the body the way I understood it to be. The moment I understood how shame happens or works in the body, it really gave me the clarity that I needed to continue to see how fragmentation occurs in the consciousness. So fragmentation, trauma, happens when shame is in the equation. Yes, when shame is in the equation, as well as an emotional, distressed feeling occurring in the body, and the body is unable to process it. Okay? So, again, what I'm about to show you is my personal explanation and the way I understand how shame works in the body. Why? I have been noticing that shame has been a common theme. Either people they're not understanding what shame is. I noticed that several people believe shame to be embarrassment. Yes, it could fall under that umbrella. You can obviously feel shame when you're embarrassed, but it's deeper than that. It's bigger than that. Okay. And it does involve fragmentation, which hence the filter. The filter you're seeing before you, it gives it a feel of fragmentation, so to speak, or that Russian doll with multiple layers, right? It's like multiple aspects. You know, you open one box, you have another box, and then you open up another box, and then there's a smaller box, and the box gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And this gives it the infinite effect. Again, this video is about how I understood it the best, how shame works in the body. Okay? And how fragmentation takes place. But I'm not going to be going into, well, it goes hand in hand, I guess. How fragmentation happens in the body, hence fragmentation, trauma, when something very impactful occurs and consciousness wants to resolve the issue, whatever that emotional distress situation that you encountered. And let's say the consciousness that is experiencing the situation is unable to find resolve or process or regulate the experience. What happens is that it tries to sever, right? It tries to break off, fragment from the aspect of you that's experiencing the pain, right? To self-preserve and survive the experience. So I did a diagram and I laughed because my partner, bless his soul, he was able to conjure up the vision that I had inside of me in terms of how I was going to illustrate shame and fragmentation, right? And how trauma, whenever you're experiencing something impactful and it's too much, in a sense, it's like a shattered effect, right? It's, for example, if something's whole, let's say this candle, it's whole, right? It begins whole, falls to the floor, it shatters, let's say, in 5 pieces. Now there's 5 different pieces, right? And so the goal is to piece yourself back together to become whole again. Obviously, as you know, many of us, well, we were not taught really how to process our distress. So since children, we had a lot of distress in the body, our somatic body, our nervous system, our felt perception endured a lot, minus the regulation, right? the emotions being regulated. And if the emotions and the experience is not processed, regulated, then it stays stuck in the body. So the way as it happened, so to speak. And so you have aspects of you that are still stuck, frozen back in time, unprocessed, unmatured, right? And they're still age, whatever age you were when you suffered that distress, 1, 2, 3 years. So anyway, let me show you this diagram. This is a child that, as you can see, he, she, they are considered to be whole. Okay, for simplicity's sake, let's say a child goes through an emotional distressed experience, right? But they're whole. All of a sudden, it suffers a emotional distress encounter, unable to self-regulate. Therefore, consciousness to self-preserve, survive the experience begins to fragment. So this is how it looks like. It begins to break off from the aspects it perceives to be of threat. Okay? So it begins to create a fragmentation effect. And here is an example of how, when a child doesn't receive resolve, it furthers fragments, tries to separate, push away, consciousness tries to push away the aspects that are, again, being perceived as the issue. And well, shame is literally the body's response that something is a threat, that something is not good, worthy, acceptable. You can use whatever term you wish to use. But essentially, shame is what's creating the separation, the fragmentation to occur, the separation. Okay, so here you see shame is all around the child because the child experienced a push away, a rejection, an abandonment of some sort. It can't self-regulate, right? So therefore the consciousness that dwells in the body begins to do what it has to do to survive and self-regulate, which is push away the parts that perceives to be the problem and stores them and compartmentalizes them in a place where it's hidden. Okay. But the further the fragments begin to separate, the more shame we begin to feel. The whole body begins to vibrate in more shame because you're separating aspects of you perceive to be the problem. The one that's creating chaos, the one that's creating rejection, the one that's creating separation, the one that's, or rather said, the aspects that the overall consciousness perceives to be the threat, the one that's creating you being shamed, you being wronged, you feeling bad, you being bad. Okay. The parts that the overall consciousness perceives is the part that's creating the problem, right? Of no acceptance, no love. Let's suppose that the child never gets resolution. He becomes an adult. Now, if you notice the shame, which is considered to be in this diagram, the gray dark color that's in between the fragments that's creating the silhouette of the man or the woman or the human being. The gray represents the shame that's traveling throughout the body. Okay? As the fragmentations are further separating, because, mind you, the overall consciousness is trying to get rid of, push away, hide the aspects that perceives are the problem. The problem meaning the reasons in which why you may not be receiving acceptance from the external world. Okay, so then it tries to push it away. So when the overall consciousness, the one that's listening to this, wants to, feel better, is going to want to further push away what it perceives to be the problem that's creating the rejection, the reflection of rejection in the external reality. Again, hopefully I'm making sense. But there's a problem, Roger, because the shame begins to gain more momentum because separation is happening and it's intensifying. This is what begins to happen. When you're fragmented and you push away aspects of you that you were taught to believe that were the problem, you want to push those away. The overall consciousness wants to push away those aspects of you that you learned through the external world when you were a little child, that those things were the problem. And then society fueled it. So essentially you push it further away, and this is how you're looking. You're no longer whole. You're fragmented. And the problem is that, see, the gray in between the fragments is shame. The in between from one fragment to the other, separated. The in between from one fragment to the other is creating pain, resistance, shame. Shame is the pain from pushing away an aspect of you that you perceive as the problem, yet it's still you. You see what I mean? It's still you. You're essentially hating yourself. You're essentially rejecting yourself. So that's what's causing the pain, the emotional pain. So essentially, when you're this fragmented, loneliness, sadness, isolation, depression, this begins to be birthed. This begins to be birthed. This right here, because you're fragmented. Now you have your whole body is vibrating in shame. Why shame? Because you're fragmented. Shame is really you. It is simply the energy, the consciousness that perceives itself to be separate from itself, aspects of you that is perceiving to be wrong, bad, unlovable. So you push them away so you can receive love. But the irony is you're creating more pain, because the more separated your fragments are, the more shame you're embodying. You're being enveloped in. This is the perfect scenario of someone that's suffering isolation, depression. Right here. You see that? Again, shame is the gray that's in between the fragments. Each fragment is memory. It is an aspect of you that has been broken, pushed away. And the further away you push away parts of you that the overall consciousness perceives to be the problem, perceives to be the one that's getting rejected, perceives the parts that are, it perceives that, it thinks that by pushing away the aspect of you that is angry is going to yield acceptance. But that's not the truth. The more you push away the aspect of you that's angry, so to speak, the more shame you're going to feel, because you're pushing away the part that's angry. The goal is to try to merge the anger and the rest of you together. See, the anger is even angry because it's perceived to be the problem, and it doesn't have the right to express itself. But again, I want to keep it as simple as possible. So ultimately, this diagram is showing you someone, like this is someone that's completely fragmented, that is constantly being governed by shame. I must be bad. I must have made the mistake. It was my fault. I'm the problem. Or victimhood, which rightfully so, someone can feel like, things are happening to them. But if you're constantly feeling like it's happening to you, and you feel shame when something goes wrong, and you feel constantly rejected, criticized, judged, you're governed by shame. meaning that you have many fragmentations and many aspects of you that you've learned to push away because you believe it's the problem, because you grew up essentially in a household where you were constantly being told you were doing something wrong, that's not right, don't do that, don't touch that. So if you grew up in a household that you were constantly being reprimanded for your wrongdoings, you were being reprimanded for crying and wanting mom, or crying for wanting dad, and you were reprimanded for crying, you grow up understanding that crying is bad, that crying, creates rejection, that crying is the problem for receiving love. So I have to not cry to receive love. I have to not cry to receive love. And so you push away the aspect of you that's emotional, that cries. But the problem is, the further you're pushing it away, because you're pushing away what you perceive to be the problem ultimately to get acceptance or love or approval, you're enhancing the shame that's in between the fragments. And when you're enhancing the shame, you then become a vibrational match to more things that are going to make you feel shame. And you're going to perceive it as shameful because that is the reality of your internal world. That is the reality of your internal world right here. So if you noticed, again, what does this illustration show? It shows literally a fragmented being that perceives it has that there's a lot of aspects within itself that's the problem. And so it's trying to push it away so it doesn't feel rejection. So it doesn't feel not loved. So it doesn't have to feel, alone. But the irony is that you're doing that yourself. You're literally creating, furthermore, a gap inside of you where shame just takes over. So this is a person that literally is governed by shame. Now, why do I feel this is very important to talk about? I'll tell you why. Because a lot of people, that when I ask them that they're, if they feel shame or whatever, or, what do they think shame is? They believe that shame represents all their mistakes, everything that they did that's not right, everything that they're doing that's inappropriate, which is true. Shame means something that you did that you were not supposed to do, or a mistake that you did, and now you're being reprimanded for it.